All right, y'all. So, one of my followers on Twitch, appreciate you. Yi Kifan, real one, gave me a new video to react to. Let's see what this is talking about. It says, extinct animals that we should revive. I feel like if they're dead, we shouldn't mess with the dead. But let's see.
Lived on Earth are extinct. And honestly, some of them really didn't deserve it. Like, we lost dire wolves, and in exchange, we got pugs and exotic bullies in their place. And these things live in constant agony and can barely walk. It's one of the worst trades in history. But the dire wolf isn't necessarily what you think it is. Hollywood exaggerated the dire wolf a little bit because these wolves were on average the same size as the largest modern wolf. So don't get me wrong, they were still huge, but they weren't horse size. And the reason I said the dire wolf didn't deserve to go extinct is because realistically, it did nothing wrong. The reason it went extinct is because the mega herbivores went extinct. But I think we should bring back dire wolves purely because these abominations we call dogs exist. And I just think that's unfair. And the next species I think we should bring back is honestly sick. And when you see this animal, you understand why people used to think dragons existed. This thing is insane. The Irish elk stood at around 6'7" at its shoulders.
An Irish elk looks nothing like a fucking dragon. What the hell?
And it weighed an estimated average of 1,300 pounds. So even large people look like ants next to this thing. Like, if you saw this in a forest at night and it was staring you down, you would assume that God wants you dead. Like, this was taller than a polar bear and a moose. And we consider the polar bear to be a death machine, and we consider the moose to be an unpredictable menace to society. But early humans did presumably see this thing and hunt this thing. They found some cave drawings of it, but they're kind of rare. There's a lot of cave drawings that depict elk, but the Irish elk had like a hump, and it was a different color from the rest of its fur. So out of cave drawings, it was relatively easy to figure out which one they were drawing, and there wasn't many of these. And the fact that there's so few cave drawings kind of indicates that there wasn't that many Irish elk alive. And there probably wasn't, because it turns out the Irish elk might have went extinct for what humans were really good at, chasing things. So even though there are people who have done it justice, but I'm just saying, out of the people I've seen talk about the shark, people just say it was the biggest shark to ever live, and it was huge. But they don't really put it into perspective, because the Megalodon was the length of 2 city buses, and it was only 10 meters shorter than the blue whale. You know, the largest mammal on the planet. And given the fact that it was that big, it's not surprising that the Megalodon's diet was considered to be actual whales. And researchers believe the Megalodon hunted by crushing and puncturing the lungs of its prey. It did that to whales. This shark was so big that when they found the fossilized teeth of it in 1554, they insisted they weren't real. The Megalodon is definitely up there as one of the largest things to ever exist on this planet. Now, even though we compare the Megalodon to the great white shark a lot, they're actually not from the same family as sharks. For a while, researchers thought they were both part of the Carcharodon family because their teeth were extremely similar, just wildly different sizes, but now researchers believe it was probably just convergent evolution, which is basically just two different species evolving a similar trait independently from each other because it's beneficial in their environment. But the Megalodon is now considered part of the Otodus family globally, but we still don't really know when its home was the ocean, with an estimated wingspan of 15 to seabird with a horrible name, therefore calling it Big Seagull. And the Big Seagull was very big. It's one of the largest bird fossils ever found, with an estimated wingspan of 15 to 20 feet wide. And to put that into context, the bird with the largest wingspan currently is a marabou stork, and their wingspan maximum is 13 feet. That's not even their average. Their average wingspan size is much smaller at 9 feet. So the Big Seagull was easily one of the biggest birds to ever live. But there's not that much info besides.
Imagine you're at the beach and like you're eating a hot dog and this is the fucking bird that comes and takes that shit out your hand. It's probably taking your arm with it too. Shit.
That, even their wingspan is an estimate. But one other cool trait they have is their teeth. Or I guess lack thereof, because they don't have teeth. Instead, they had a beak that looked like a jagged saw, which, yeah, looks terrifying in like a cool way. And since it is a seabird, it kind of does look like an evil seagull, at least the reconstructions do. But since this thing looks like an evil seagull, I think we should bring it back because I do not like seagulls. They're annoying. Like, I just think seagulls should have some competition. And one of the largest birds to ever exist sounds perfect for that task. Now, realistically, these things would become infinitely. In fact, there's footage of it, and it looks weird. And that's because it is. You might be thinking a Tasmanian tiger, or wolf, as it's called, is related to a wolf or...
Why does its mouth look like that? It looks like a crocodile wolf. Please don't skip through. I got 10 more minutes? Okay, I got you.
Tiger, but no, it's a marsupial, so it's closer related to a kangaroo. And from what I understand, the big thing with marsupials is they have pouches. And the weird part about the pouches is that in the Tasmanian tiger, the male and female both have a pouch, but the males have a scrotal pouch. And I'm not elaborating further. But overall, the Tasmanian tiger is just like a really goofy animal. Like, it didn't walk super well because it had a really stiff gait. And it could also hop and stand on its hind legs like a kangaroo. Oh, and their mouths could also open up to 80 degrees wide, which was kind of scary looking. And it also might not surprise you to know that the Tasmanian tiger was considered an apex predator. So with it being considered an apex predator in mind, as well as its freaky wide jaw, you're probably wondering, why did this thing go extinct? Because I was wondering the same thing. It doesn't make any sense. Like, yeah, the Tasmanian tiger's weird, okay? It's a weird animal, but it was pretty good at what it did. And then meanwhile, we have koalas that exist, and they're so stupid that they can't recognize their own food if it's on a table in front of them. And somehow that thing outlived the Tasmanian tiger. This thing going extinct doesn't make much sense. And that's because as a species, it was probably our fault. I mean, every species we've talked about that has had people coexisting with it at some point probably went extinct to some extent because of humans. But in the case of the Tasmanian tiger, we have like receipts. So in mainland Australia, where the Tasmanian tiger used to also reside, issues like climate change and people were especially prevalent for the Tasmanian tiger. But the issue was less related directly to people. The issue was really dingo. Because what people assumed happened is the dingoes were generally better hunters and better adapted to living near people. So when people moved to Australia, dingoes had a much easier time adapting because they were better hunters already and they didn't have issues with people. Tasmanian tigers, on the other hand, we're not domesticated animals, and the dingo is so closely related to dogs that they're just considered feral dogs now. They're not different enough to be a subspecies, which means in the case of extinction on the mainland of Australia for the Tasmanian devil, it wasn't directly our fault, but the dingo is a descendant of domesticated dogs. We made the dingo.
Isn't the Tasmanian devil something else? Isn't that like Tasmanian devil? Ain't that like closer to like a badger or something? Am I tripping?
A thing. So it is kind of our fault. So with the help of climate change, dingo dogs, and human activity, the Tasmanian tiger went extinct on mainland Australia about 3,000 years ago. But in Tasmania, they were still around up until 1930, until this guy shot the last one. So the reason that guy shot the Tasmanian tiger was because they were blamed for attacking sheep. The Tasmanian government put out a bounty on their heads without doing like any research or due diligence, and over 2,000 bounties were claimed, but they estimate farmers were killing a lot more. And I get the farmers' perspective of trying to protect their livelihood, I get that, but here's the annoying part. The sheep that were dying from attacks probably weren't even from Tasmanian tigers. Apparently, they were found to be incapable of handling prey larger than like 11 pounds. So they exterminated the species for killing sheep when in fact, the species was incapable of doing that. So I think we should bring this animal back. The Tasmanian tiger did not deserve the Salem witch trial experience. And for our next species, we had the giant ape, which I'm gonna call the giant ape because its actual name is stupid. But the giant ape was like giant. It would have been around 9 feet tall and weighed 600 pounds. Actual name is stupid, but the giant ape.
This gotta be racist, bro. What?
Ape was like giant. It would have been around 9 feet tall and weighed 600 pounds, making it 40% heavier than the average male gorilla. Although their size.
It's orange. Why? Okay. All right. We gonna call it Blackie. This is just IRL Bigfoot from China. Oh shit. So, damn, it's bigger than an orangutan. That's crazy as fuck. How tall is that? That's fucking huge. That's like my ceiling. That's taller than my ceiling. Okay. All right. Let's get back into it.
Is debated because the only real information we have of the species' size is its teeth. And teeth can be unreliable for estimating an animal's size because the size of an animal's tooth and their height are not directly correlated. But even with margin of error, the giant ape was definitely bigger than a gorilla. Just maybe not 40% bigger. And you might think they sound terrifying because they kind of do, but they were probably fairly chill because it looks like they were herbivores and they used to reside in China. So researchers speculate that the giant ape also ate bamboo just like the panda because their jaws are also pretty similar and pandas are like really unique. And finding out they were like pandas made me not want to resurrect them. Because if you're new here, I talk about why animals should go extinct sometime. And sometimes it's more of a joke. Like dolphins are super interesting and they can be a little evil, but extinction's a little bit too far. And pandas aren't evil or anything. It's just everything.
They're just stupid. Pandas are honestly just fucking idiots. That's it. I don't think they should go extinct, but I can see why they're in the zoos. They probably would not survive in the wild. They're fucking idiots. Like, I've watched, like, hour-long videos of pandas. They're dumb as fuck.
thing about them makes them destined for failure, and somehow they're not dead. Like, for example, they eat all day and then sleep the rest of the time that they're not eating, so they literally can't do anything besides eat and sleep. And the pandas are only fertile for like 40 days of the year or something, and if a mother panda has more than one cub, she will most likely kill the second child by accident. I really don't know how they're alive, but I really don't want to resurrect this thing purely because if it was like a panda, it definitely died for a reason. But I still felt the need to include it on this list because one, it's kind of cool still. It's a giant ape. And then also, the giant ape has been used as an explanation for Bigfoot. Basically, this anthropologist named Grover Krantz claimed that the giant ape...
So are they trying to say Bigfoot came from the giant ape? Like it's like the species kind of went like, it split? Because, I mean... if these were found in China, I'm just trying to figure out how we got Bigfoot here, like in America.
It was a missing link in the hunt for Bigfoot. And Bigfoot was actually a species called this. And he made this claim in around 1970 and just kept making it until he died. And since he made this claim in 1970, you might be thinking it was considered less outrageous back then because they had less information. But no, this claim that the giant ape was related to Bigfoot was so bonkers that self-proclaimed amateur monster hunters dismissed the claims and basically called them insane. Like, this is the equivalent of moon landing deniers trying to convince flat earthers that the earth is round. It's the same thing. And for our next species we should bring back, and it's probably the most famous one on this list, we have the woolly mammoth. And honestly, I think most people know what a woolly mammoth is at this point. There was like 8 Ice Age movies or something, and out of this list, it's also the only one to have like real attempts to try to revive it. And overall, the woolly mammoth is not much different to elephants. It's just like an elephant that's specced into cold weather. That's kind of it. So it is a little weird that they went extinct because elephants managed to make it to this time period, and there's also still cold places. Like, it's not like it didn't have a place to go. And I mean, like, obviously it's not that simple, but what I'm trying to get at here is that we probably killed these things. There is a lot of evidence that humans and woolly mammoths were interacting kind of often because there's tools made out of their bones, there's lots of cave drawings of them, and there's even sculptures made out of their tusks. So it's pretty clear older humans were interacting with woolly mammoths pretty often. And climate change definitely played a role in them going extinct. That was definitely a factor. But over time, the amount...
Oh, okay. Okay. So I get how the monkey thing, okay, I get it. I forgot that some of these are animals that were like from the Ice Age, like Pangea and shit. So, I mean, it technically had one big ass continent to roam around before it split. So I guess that makes sense.
Now we've blamed climate change versus ourselves has like shifted a lot towards us. When I was initially researching this video, I thought it was kind of ridiculous that people assume that humans played a massive role in the woolly mammoth's extinction. And then the more I looked into it, I realized that we kill everything around us. There's even evidence that they would migrate to avoid human camps. And if they were scared of humans back then to the point where we can kind of map it after this long, yeah, old humans must have been hunting these things way too often. But we're
hunting the fuck out of them.
regardless of human activity, climate change would not have helped the woolly mammoth at all, and there's still a high chance it would have gone extinct, but who knows? Regardless, I think we should
But my thing is like, what are we gaining from bringing it back? Like, what do we gain?
resurrect the woolly mammoth, because at this current moment, it is one of the only old species like this that I'm aware of that we have DNA for and can potentially make exist. There's a couple issues with it, like the DNA is like really old and it was frozen in ice, so it's not that great. Like, that's a real problem. And then surprisingly, there's ethical concerns with artificially bringing an extinct species back to life. Who would have thought? But yeah, researchers are concerned about the ethics of bringing back a species, especially when the first couple tries will probably be monsters. And I am definitely against artificially reviving a species if it's going to be an abomination or of terrible quality of life. But if your concern is like defying God, humans have been doing that forever, and I'd much rather have a woolly mammoth exist in this world than this. And for our next species, we had the woolly rhino. And before I talk about this species, I have to ask, were people taught about the woolly rhino in school? Because I was definitely taught about the woolly mammoth, but I do not remember a woolly rhino. And I feel like it is something I would have remembered. But anyways, the extinct woolly rhino is not much different from the current living rhino. But unlike the woolly mammoth and elephant that were generally the same size, the woolly rhino would have been a lot bigger, and its horn would have been bigger. But besides them being bigger and having wool, they weren't much different. And all of the woolly rhino fossils were found throughout Eurasia, and they also found a bunch of cave drawings of the woolly rhino. So humans definitely interacted with the species. And just like the woolly mammoth, we probably contributed to their extinction. But besides that, yeah, they're really just like a woolly rhino. That's why they're called that. But I think we should bring them back because, like, why not? And for our next extinct species up for resurrection, we have the giant sloth. And the only reason I had for putting this thing on the list is that it's just better than the current sloth. That's it. The current alive sloth can barely move around at all. And the only reason they exist is to basically just be a bioweapon. Sloths carry so many parasites, diseases, and bacteria that you should actually
Topside Tyson's Carini. I don't know what half of these are.
Never touched them. And then when you compare the current sloth to the giant sloth was just better in every single way. First off, these things were huge. They weighed like 9,000 pounds, supposedly. So even if the giant sloth was slow, it's understandable because they were 9,000 pounds. Like, sumo wrestlers definitely move slower than other athletes. But that doesn't mean they can't win the fight. But there's evidence that humans did hunt the giant sloth, and this does seem like a prime target for a caveman. It weighed 9,000 pounds. It was probably a herbivore, and was more likely than not very fast. It makes a lot of sense why cavemen would hunt a month's worth of food as it slowly hobbles away. And based off the way its skeleton's made up, yeah, this thing probably didn't run, crawl, or jump. Which means that this thing was up for grabs. But the giant sloth is actually a sick animal because it really is just the modern sloth, but actually cool. And for our next extinct species, we have Quetzalcoatlus, which I may or may not have pronounced correctly. And the reason we should bring back this dinosaur is extremely simple. It was basically a real-life dragon. This thing had a wingspan of over 30 feet wide and is estimated to have weighed about 550 pounds, which doesn't sound like a lot for such a large creature, and that's because it is.
These shits are huge.
If you're gonna fly, you have to be light to do it. So even though it's basically as tall as a giraffe, it didn't weigh a lot. But yeah, we should bring this back because it would be sick to have in the world. And next up on the list, we have terror bird. And I am a lot less keen on bringing these back because of the name. They're still cool birds, but yeah, their names
It's like a dodo bird.
are fun. So the terror bird had a height range of 3 to 10 feet and could have weighed up to 800 pounds. Different types of this bird managed to get across the entire world, which basically just means before the species went extinct, it was around for a very long time. But the terror bird was a killing machine. There are 4 types of these birds, and I'm not going to say their names for obvious reasons, and researchers think that these birds might not have hunted bigger animals, but at the same time, they totally could have. But this is one of those animals you find out existed at one point, and you're like, wow, I'm glad that doesn't exist anymore. And then you move on to the next part of your script, the Dunkleosteus, which I'm going to try to avoid saying again, and it was a type of snapping jaw fish, which are the fish that snap their jaws and are scary. But since this fish's fossil is relatively incomplete, we don't really know exactly how big they'd be. There were older estimates that it was like 30 feet long, but knowing what we know now, it was more likely on average like 16 feet long, but it would have weighed something like 3,200 to 3,900 pounds, which is absurd. That is the weight of a car. But the thing that makes this fish really unique and scary is that its teeth were shaped like a jagged knife, so anything it would bite into, it would just rip apart. And the scariest part about this fish is that since it existed so long ago, even at the size of 4,000 pounds, it probably wasn't even the top of the food chain. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you're new. Click the entry and check out more of my content, and have a good one.
That's actually crazy, because imagine if that's not the top predator underwater, there was something bigger than that eating him. That's crazy. That's crazy.